Hello and welcome to our podcast. This episode, Vick's chip, plays heavily on a lot of themes that have been developed but not necessarily foregrounded as much in the themes of gambling, trust, and betrayal. We have so many different characters who struggle with trusting each other because they're new to each other or the relationships are built on things other than telling the truth. And those are contrasted with our various Terminators throughout the episode who are always uh, putting on many different masks. It seems like a different mask for each person they interact with. And that, of course, throws into stark relief how often humans put on their own masks when they deal with other humans. The themes of betrayal and impostature and disguise and even gambling have been a big part of the Terminator franchise since it began. Of course, in the first movie, we found out that Terminators can imitate any voice they hear. When in the second movie, of course, the liquid Terminator T1000 can imitate any person it sees. The element of gambling, however, um, I think takes the issue of trust and betrayal and kind of adds a new layer to it. The the way that all of the characters have to take leaps of faith in these life and death situations just to achieve a temporary victory in a long war. And I think that it helps us to really think about all the different kinds of trust games that we play with each other, especially considering that this episode was part of a show that plays heavily on the war on terror and the fact that terrorists are often part of the civilian population before they strike, leading to the same kinds of senses of betrayal and terror that a robot who looks like a human who suddenly uh, murders a bunch of people or even just murders someone very close to them. So, in Vic's chip, as we dive into this episode, I look forward to digging into those questions of gambling, trust, and betrayal. My name is Ian.
My name is Calvin.
Come with us if
Come
you
with
want
us
to live.
if you want to live. Is there a sound
All
delay?
right. Yeah, we have a lag.
Okay.
So, our first question, of course, is what's underneath the mask? And I think we have to ask the question, which mask? I feel like almost every character in this show is wearing at least one mask.
Well, so this episode has pretty heavy Sarah narration in it. And that's the first line of her narration. Is everyone is wearing a mask. Obviously, the episode begins with Cromartie, who is pretending to be an FBI agent. His mask is the thinnest in that whenever he comes up upon an obstacle that requires finesse in order to and human social skills in order to overcome the obstacle, he just chooses to erupt into violence instead. Kills a high school principal, possibly.
I am curious how many high school principals.
Yeah, you would think that would warrant a news story and therefore would be a higher profile than Cromartie would want to have. But
High school serial killer strikes LA.
Yeah. I mean, nobody cares if you kill a bunch of people named Sarah, but if you kill multiple high school principals, I think the police will take notice.
Well,
And
that
might even
did
put
make the
out an
news.
APB for someone. Might even put out an APB for a guy impersonating an FBI agent. I'm not sure if that constitutes a plot hole. It's just interesting. What are you doing, Ian?
I'm looking for headphones. I feel like I'm getting more
Okay.
feedback than I thought, but I don't have them. Well, hopefully we won't have too much of a problem.
Hopefully.
So Cromartie's plot is very much, I would say, the B plot in this episode. It opens us up, but it's not something that really affects our main character's main goals. It intersects once in the middle in a very effective scene, but I would say that we have the A plot of the T888 Vick, and then the B plot of Cromartie. Would you say that's a fair analysis of the structure?
Yeah, so I mean, the episode is called Vick's Chip. Vick's Chip, of course, refers to the T888's processing chip that Cameron chose not to destroy. Was it 3 episodes ago? And lied to Sarah about when she said that she had destroyed everything. That plot opens up with Derek. Hold on a second, Ian. Okay. Sorry about that, Ian. My parents have come to visit, and they arrived sooner than I thought they would.
Okay. So,
where were we?
We were talking about how...
Oh, Vick's chip.
Yes. You were saying that...
Vick's chip is the... Go for it.
No. You're the one with... Just keep going.
Okay, Vick's chip is a classic secret diary story. It's a sort of it's very Sherlock Holmesian, where we have this extended but fragmented, because apparently Terminators do not store information the way that humans do. Fragmented story within a story. It has a fake out in which we see Vick killing a woman who we assume is Barbara, the woman he's pretending to be married to, or at least living with. We discover that it's not Barbara, that it's in fact a lobbyist who's working against Barbara's plan to integrate all of the traffic lights in Los Angeles, which seems like they would already be integrated into a central system, but maybe not.
Well, I don't know when in our timeline the centralization happened, but you could see that Barbara could be working on like a program that's more efficient. So maybe they're already linked, but this is more efficient. It's an improvement software.
Yes.
This
anyway,
whole backstory
the fake out. Go ahead.
This whole backstory of Vick really leads us to question a lot of things. Number one, it appears, I could be wrong, but it appears that Vick and Barbara are married. At least that's the impression I got. It didn't seem like just dating. But every time we see Vick and Barbara interacting, he's acting almost Arnold Schwarzenegger like as Terminator. Now, Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course, is a real person, and when he's interacting with real people as himself, he doesn't feel like a robot. But when he's the Terminator, he feels like a robot. And so my mind just goes wild trying to figure out, why would Barbara, a human, marry someone who acts like this all the time? There's a lot of questions that I have for how did this happen?
Well, and it's interesting because when the Vick T888 was introduced, we had assumed that its mission was to kill the resistance cell that Derek Reese was a part of, but we discover in this episode that was just a side quest for Vick, that Vick's actual mission was to help Barbara to realize her dream of integrating all of the traffic lights in Los Angeles as a potential
Such an important dream.
avenue, as a potential avenue towards siring Skynet.
Well, the way they explain it in the episode is that the Turk is considered the brain or CPU, while this traffic program could be considered its central nervous system. So my guess is they're seeing it as sort of an intake, a way to develop large networks of smaller machines, in this case traffic lights or traffic light systems, which I have been told are actually quite sophisticated. So the idea of Skynet and artificial intelligence wanting to build on something that's already very sophisticated does make sense.
And apparently John is aware of this from following the news or something. And he says that if this Los Angeles traffic system is successful, that it will be integrated into a larger system that will be statewide in California and therefore managed by the governor's office and the state capital.
I'm very curious how many city planners they actually talked to when they wrote this episode.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm not sure that it makes a lot. Like some things in this episode doesn't make a lot of sense if you think about it too hard. But
it makes as much sense as a time travel robot does.
It is very effective in playing upon our narrative interest as viewers. Yeah, so I mean, part of the function of the lobbyist storyline is that it causes us to question whether Vick has human-like feelings for Barbara and therefore wouldn't harm her.
Wait. Did you?
I'm just
did
saying,
you genuinely have that question?
This is how the narrative. No, because I've seen the episode before, but the narrative is leading us in a direction of relieving the tension of expectation that Vick is going to kill Barbara, which is in fact what he does at the end of the episode. But if we hadn't had the fake out with the killing of the lobbyist earlier, we would have been expecting him to kill Barbara all along, and therefore it allows the killing of Barbara at the end of the episode to be a surprise of sorts.
I don't think it was a surprise. As I said, he's acting like a robot the whole time, so I never thought he cared about her at all.
Okay. It is an interesting, I mean, maybe what I'm thinking of, it is an interesting parallel to a brief plot line in the Fringe television series in which one of the multiverse traversing shapeshifters develops a relationship with someone from our world in order to gain access to Fringe Division. And the name of that episode is Do Shapeshifters Dream of Electric Sheep? Of course, a play on the classic Philip K. Dick novel that became Blade Runner.
I thought Well, that gets into the Fringe lore, so let's not go too deep into that. But that is a great show.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of
the
wandering around
killing of the
dark
lobbyist
places
leads to, yes, one of the points of levity in what is in some ways a rather dark and disturbing episode.
Very dark.
Is John and Kyle pairing up, wandering around the woods in the dark with flashlights. And John asks Derek, do we do this a lot, you and me, in the future? And Derek pauses for a moment and says, yeah, we do this a lot. There's also a lot of Sarah and Derek humor in this episode, which has replaced the Sarah and Cameron humor.
Because Cameron is pretty scary in this episode, which is something I wanted to kind of bring out after last episode. But I think despite the fact that Cameron basically sentences 2 people to die last episode, they lean heavily on the question of, is she human? Does she have a soul? Whereas in this episode, they really want us to be afraid of her. The way she acts towards people at school, the way she never really... She acts very untrustworthy, and they still have to put their faith in her to go into the network when she could conceivably become her own Skynet. But instead, they plug her in and she does what she agreed with them to do. So it's kind of an interesting flip. Even though she is more helpful here, she's portrayed as scarier.
Yes.
What did you think about the whole the tunnel chase and attempting to plant the virus in the city hall? What did you think of that section?
I mean, you in your notes, you asked the question, does this have strong callbacks to the first 2 movies? Not really, but that whole the short heist sequence in City Hall does have the feeling of a sort of cyberpunky type mission. Maybe the only visual callback to the movies is that the computers in City Hall are lit in such a way as to look sort of distinctively evil looking, in the way that things are often coded to look in the first 2 movies.
I just think that section of the plot feels like the writers were vamping for time, because the whole point was to get to the point where they had to trust Cameron and put her into the network. But they had to fail in some way. And this whole tunnel thing it doesn't feel like they get anywhere character-wise. I don't know. It felt a little padded in that section. But the rest of the episode is a lot tighter.
You have 2 big character beats. So you have the stakeout scene in which Lena Headey acknowledges, as the show often does, that human nature is deeply fallen, that humans don't love and respect each other the way that they ought to. And then she expresses empathy, a kind of empathy for Skynet, in saying, sometimes I understand why they dropped the bombs on us. Then she asked Derek how he knows that there are tunnels underneath City Hall. And he said, because Kyle and I used to live there after they dropped all the bombs on us. Which again kind of informs the sort of the strong beat of Derek's character, which is that he is other than Cameron, he is the only character in the show who has actually lived in a post-Judgment Day world. The scene also poses an interesting time paradox. One of 2, which is that Derek remembers there being a hole into the elevator shaft where there is now a wall, and so they blow it up, which leads to the question: does the reason he remember there being a hole there because he himself blew it up in the past? And then there's the beat at the end of the heist sequence in which Sarah forcefully reminds Derek that they are not fighting metal and that it would be wrong to just kill two police officers simply for doing their job.
Yeah, I think those are good character beats and fun ideas. I don't know. There's just something about the whole tunnel sequence that it didn't feel as urgent or tight as the rest of the episode to me. And maybe it was just me.
I agree that it's not necessary to the plot, but I do think it adds depth to the episode. It also Derek and Sarah are often looking for brick and mortar, real world solutions to problems, whereas John and Cameron often resort to technological solutions.
The generation gap.
Well, it's a generation gap, and it's also a worldview gap. John is more comfortable in using technology to his own ends. The second potential time paradox is that this is one of the first examples we have of John hacking a Terminator at the instigation of a Terminator that he has already hacked in the future. He asks Cameron whether she knows how to access Vick's chip, and she says, "No, but you do." Yes, ma'am.
Where's all this dry food?
It's on the floor. Would you like me to get it for you?
On the floor where?
Excuse me, Ian. All right.
Okay. So you highlighted a discussion between John and Cameron, which I think emphasizes what I was saying earlier, that even though Cameron doesn't murder anyone this episode, she doesn't beat anyone up really, she saves John's life and she saves the day. They really lean on Cameron is a machine. Cameron is very potentially, if not actually, evil. When they have her say, Cromartie's moved on, it's what I would do. And then John says, the reason I know that's true is because deep inside you think just like him. And it really emphasizes this distrust. Why do you think they lean so hard on that this episode?
The past few episodes have raised a lot of questions about a potential psychological nature to Terminators. And I think some of the things that John says in this episode are showing where he as a character is coming from at this particular point in the series character arc for him. It also potentially answers the question that is posed at the beginning of the episode, which is if everyone is wearing some kind of mask, what mask is John wearing? It's evident from the way that he treats Cameron that he has an emotional attachment to her, and yet he says various things that seem to claim that he does not. Particularly, you think of the scene in which he is using a blade to open up her skull to access her chip, and then the scene at the end in which he reinserts the chip and seems to be worried about whether she will reactivate or not.
Yeah. And this, of course, will get much more complicated starting with the season 2 opening episode. But you definitely get a sense that John wants to care about Cameron as a person, but keeps telling himself not to. So there's a real tension inside him that makes it very intense every time he interacts with her.
Yeah, I was thinking about, as I often do, C.S. Lewis's The Four Loves, which is a book about the different ways in which humans express love. Yeah. And the opening chapter of that book is about the human ability to love things that are incapable of loving them back in a human way. Whether it's concepts, ideas, places, inanimate objects,
Sociopaths,
pets, sociopaths. I don't think he specifically mentions that, but that would be an implication of what he says. So using that ethical framework, John has the capacity for genuinely loving Cameron, even though he at some level acknowledges that she is not capable of reciprocating those feelings.
So you had a lot of questions about the technical aspects of what John and Cameron do to defeat the virus. Well, to launch their own virus to defeat Skynet's virus. What were you thinking about when you saw the whole recreation of the Terminator 2 chip scene?
I mean, it seems established in the first two movies that T-800 models don't have the ability to heal in a human-like way. And so if you cut into Cameron, does she just permanently have, a flesh wound there?
No,
will it begin to rot in the way? in the way that the
We actually have
T-800
information on
in this
this
movie does.
from the first episode, the pilot, because she staples herself, and that allows her to heal. She heals very quickly from massive tears in her skin. Heal in less than a couple of days. So I think it just heals up once they're resealed.
I see. But then Cromartie is not able to heal in that way in the first 2 episodes.
Well, the first 2 episodes take place over a very short amount of time. So I don't think there's necessarily enough time for him to heal from basically a complete skin burning off effect. You have to have some skin for it to heal, I think. And Cromartie is down to a skeleton. That's why he has to get to that evil scientist who builds him the red goo that he immerses himself in to grow the new skin.
Aha! So you acknowledge that he is evil.
Well, I'm just going with the terminology that you
I've been
set
playing
up.
the long game, Ian. I've tricked you into admitting that scientist was evil.
I do not think he was evil, but I am playing into your terminology that you set up for the episode.
I see. So why is the chip? It seems like a rush, like a poof of air comes out of her skull when he removes the chip. Is it like vacuum sealed? And if so, why?
For cooling purposes, probably. Since it's the processing unit, it does need to be cooler than the rest of the unit. I also am curious. I haven't watched the scene from Terminator 2, which I think was a deleted scene, in a while, but it's quite possible that they basically just copied it, including all the lighting and sound effects. So it's possible they just said, "Oh, it has that vacuum sound in the movie, so we're going to do the vacuum sound here in the show."
And then, like, where is the fusion power unit for the Terminator? Is it located in the skull, or is it located someplace in the body?
So that question is sort of answered in a season 2 episode, and we see one of them. It makes clear that Terminator 3 is not really canon to this universe because these robots do not have the power supplies we see in Terminator 3 and Terminator Salvation. So it's interesting that they chose to go an explicitly different route, but it is still in the chest, the fusion power unit.
But apparently it does not generate enough heat to be noticeable.
Well, I mean, we're basically functioning on magic technology with the Terminators, especially when you get to the T-1000, T-1001.
Well, I mean, you just raised the interesting point about the chip needing to be cooled, which presumably means that there's some sort of cooling unit in the skull.
Yeah. Probably some sort of liquid nitrogen, though, so it doesn't have to be air-cooled.
So does Cameron need to replenish a supply of liquid nitrogen periodically? I mean, that doesn't seem like it would be a self-contained system. It seems like you would eventually run out of liquid nitrogen, no matter how tightly.
I was thinking about this because Cameron can't eat, and we could theorize that she can eat partly to replenish her skin generation machine, but also possibly to break down food items into building blocks for whatever she needs, whether it's fuel for her fusion power or breaking something down into liquid nitrogen.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it works like the Mr. Fusion units in the Back to the Future movies.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. You just pour some garbage in.
She she just eats a banana peel and she's good for a couple days. I don't. So many questions, but I think perhaps a thematic explanation for why there's a rush of air when the chip gets pulled out is that breath is associated with having a soul in traditional folklore.
And so a rush of air out as the chip, which is the closest thing a Terminator has to a soul, would indicate sort of on a subconscious level that the soul is leaving the body, literally.
Correct.
I like that. Since this is a show that, even though it's very science fictional, is also very spiritually curious, I could see that being a deliberate choice, for sure.
Well, Sarah even references the fairy tale like nature of the story that Vick's Chips tells. That like the witch luring Hansel and Gretel in with candy, or the evil queen giving Snow White the poison apple, or countless other examples. Vick has ensorcelled Barbara for evil purposes, and then ends up killing her in the end.
Yeah. Almost Swan Lake like. There's two very haunting moments in the finale of the episode. The first, of course, is when they've won, and they put Cameron's chip back in her head. And John asks her what she saw, and she says everything. And I don't know, to me it felt like they were trying to get back a little bit to when she was dancing and she found ballet curious. There was a wondering look on Summer Glau's face as she played Cameron. How did that moment strike you?
I mean, of course, it asks it begs a lot of questions that it doesn't answer. I mean, she can't literally have seen everything, because we're led to believe that the functionality of the traffic system is fairly limited. At the very most, she could have only seen everything that the Los Angeles traffic signal cameras see. Now, you could say, well, Los Angeles is a microcosm of the macrocosm of human existence, or something like that. But she can't literally have seen everything. I mean, it's often a theme in cyberpunk stories that having a localized body, especially a meat body, is self-limiting. Often characters aspire towards a transhuman existence. Of course, so much of the almost, you would say, ethos of Skynet is caging superhuman intelligences within human-like bodies, which would presumably be limiting to an actual intelligence of that magnitude. You know, it goes back to the question I think we posed it.
Limiting, but also to some extent freeing, because I want to say it was in Terminator 2, but it could be somewhere else. There's a reference to the fact that when Terminators are sent on missions, they're not given a lot of leash. The Skynet seems to be very paranoid about sharing intelligence and freedom with other autonomous units, which I think could lead to some interesting stories of machines rebelling against Skynet. Perhaps something that is intended later in the series. But I think also in incarnating, one could say, a Skynet assassin in a Terminator body, they're also freeing it from Skynet's direct control.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's partially what I'm saying, is that being liberated from the body that she inhabits and being able to expand out into a network with a much larger base of terminals could potentially be mind altering, realizing that mind is maybe not the right word to describe Terminator intelligence, but mind altering for Cameron as a character.
Yeah, there's a lot of mysterious about Cameron's motivations.
The metaphysics of Terminators are somewhat more explored in the second season, but there's a lot of questions even posed by episodes in the second season that aren't ever fully answered. I don't know. Go read a William Gibson novel, man.
So the second haunting moment to me in the finale of the episode is Sarah confronts Derek in the shower, because of course this is Fox and we got to show off the hot actors, about Derek killing
I think it's
Andy.
also meant to be somewhat humorous. Yeah. Yeah, the opening into the episode is meant to be somewhat humorous and then takes a dark turn.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty common in Terminator. I mean, you were saying this episode is dark, and I'm like, I feel like all the episodes are dark. So the question for me is, do you agree with Sarah that she should threaten Derek if he lies to her again? Do you think that Derek should have killed Andy? And why do you think he lied to Sarah and John?
I think if you asked Derek that question, he would say that he was protecting Sarah and John by not giving them more information than was required. His real motivation is quite possibly just shame for killing another human being in a way that was probably not necessary. It also it's a callback to what we've also often experienced with Derek in the series so far, and is specifically referenced in the heist scene in this episode, which is that as a soldier of the future, Derek often doesn't seem to make a hard distinction between human life and the destruction of Terminators. He has missions in the same way that a Terminator often has missions. And whatever is necessary to accomplish that mission in his own mind justifies all of his actions.
So it sounds like you'd agree with Sarah that he shouldn't have lied, and maybe even that he shouldn't have killed Andy in the first place.
Unless you are persuaded that Andy is sort of existentially fated, to use a word that's often used in the Terminator franchise, to create Skynet, and that therefore the only way to prevent the creation of Skynet is to kill Andy. There's no specific mission-oriented purpose in killing Andy. It's only necessary to destroy the Turk, which is what Sarah does in the episode that introduced Andy and the Turk.
It's tricky because we know that no matter what they do, Skynet's gonna happen. So all these people they kill to try and stop Skynet, I don't know. Does it? I think that's a tricky thing because it's a Terminator movie or a show.
Causality and time paradox in Terminator stories is often not what one would expect. If Sarah was ever truly and completely successful in destroying Skynet, would reality revert to a timeline in which John doesn't exist and she was still a waitress somewhere? It often time stories in the Terminator franchise tend to work against a multiverse understanding of time travel. But thematically, the franchise often emphasizes the ability of human beings to make choices that are not fated and have a real effect on the world.
Yeah, that of course is the main quote: "No fate, but what you make." So, what would you say your final thought, your final analysis, or your final theme of the episode would be?
I really like the way that she closes the episode. Sarah's narration closes the episode when she says, "Evil always surprises us," which is true. I think most people acknowledge that evil exists and that terrible things happen all the time, and yet we are constantly surprised when bad things happen. I think part of that is because we ourselves are fallen, and therefore are always going to have an element of sympathy with the evil actions of others, in the same way that Cameron has an ability to understand the actions of Cromartie because on a deep level she is like Cromartie. But we also have a longing for a world in which evil does not exist. And so there's this constant tension in the human experience of knowing that evil exists, but also being surprised by the arrival of evil.
I think that's true, but something that sticks with me a bit is that in the midst of all this darkness and all the betrayals and murder, there's also hope in that Cameron is able to stop the Skynet plan, and she didn't betray them. She didn't betray the resistance to Vick. And so I like that it leaves us with those two balanced pieces of evil surprising, but hope also surprising.
I mean, that's certainly one way of interpreting Cameron's character.
Well, you know me. I believe Cameron has a soul.
Another way to understand it is that Cameron has just been so thoroughly reprogrammed by future John that she is incapable of betraying him, which in some ways makes her superior to other humans, which is a theme that is returned to often in the this series and the Terminator franchise as a whole, is that future John often seems to have more empathy for Skynet than for other human relationships that he has.
Which we will, of course, see much more of as this show goes on. All right, so I think that brings us to the end of our discussion. Thanks for listening and watching. Until next time, I've been Ian.
And I'm Calvin.
We'll be back.
We'll be back.